And David, I'm kind of sick of the old theme music, and to be completely honest, I never really liked it. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions and IPOs. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. Today we are covering a company that is absolutely synonymous with sports, ESPN.
The worldwide leader.
Indeed. And as they say in the very first moments of their 1979 broadcast, if you're a fan, what you'll see in the next minutes, hours, and days to follow may convince you you've gone to sports heaven.
Indeed. Acquired has gone to sports heaven here.
It was obligatory. For longtime listeners of the show, you know that we cover, typically one acquisition, and then we talk about it and we grade it, and we have a pretty standard format. This episode covers not one acquisition, but three, each one sort of fairly monumental. And I want to outline what that's going to be so that the story has a little bit of structure to it. As I mentioned, the first broadcast was in 1979. ESPN was acquired by ABC in 1984. Just 1 year later, in a surprising turn of events, the smaller Capital Cities Broadcasting Corporation incredibly bought ABC, took its name, and got ESPN along with it. And then finally, in 1996, 96, there was a $19 billion buyout of ABC by the one and only Disney.
And a little teaser, the Capital Cities acquisition had a little help on the way from a certain Oracle in Omaha.
Indeed.
That we'll get into.
Excited to dive into that. So as David was pointing out to me when I was sort of teeing up, how should we introduce this? The through line and the most important part of all of this, these acquisitions that each sort of included ESPN was ESPN itself. And so much so that by 2006, a UBS estimate was that ESPN alone was worth 40% of Disney's total value.
Yeah. I love the UBS estimate, man. That was right before I joined UBS. So.
Oh, well, it definitely wasn't accurate then because you weren't
not yet a David Rosenthal estimate. Would have been 2 years later.
Indeed. So this episode will largely focus on ESPN through the mid-90s, and the sort of digital and streaming eras are a whole nother story that we'll need to tell at some point. But this era of ESPN and its sort of rise to truly be the worldwide leader in sports really deserves its own episode that we're going to dive into today. Speaking of ESPN and Inside Baseball, yes, pun definitely intended, we did a really fun limited partner bonus show last week. We took our LPs behind the curtains of how VC firms really work, from corporate structure to incentives. If you're interested or just want to support the show, you can click the link in the show notes to become a prestigious Acquired LP, or go to kimberlite.fm/acquired. If you're new to the show, you should check out our Slack at acquired.fm. It is full of brilliant people that are providing their hot takes on the tech news of the day, often M&A and IPO related, and is also just a really great, really helpful, really friendly community. So I've really enjoyed, particularly over the last month or so, we've been on break over the holidays, just getting to chat with folks in there has been really cool.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do: operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like tabular review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
David, how are you feeling about the history and facts on this one?
Ben, I'm cool as the other side of the pillow.
I'm glad you teed me up to say that. I'm glad I didn't know how you were going to respond.
That was both awesome and so awkward. All right, listeners, let's take it in. We start back in the 1970s. It's disco time. Things are crazy in America, particularly crazy in the burgeoning cable industry, which is brand new, where all the entrepreneurs in America are headed. And we start with a guy named Bill Rasmussen. Bill was a former Air Force supply officer. He ends up getting into the television business, first as a weatherman at an NBC station in Western Massachusetts. But his lifelong dream is to get into sports, and he just loves sports. He's a sports nut. So he's doing the weather in Western Massachusetts, and he starts just like reading sports scores at the end of the weather telecast, and turns out people like it. He moves around to a few stations in New England, ends up kind of transitioning from weather into sports because he's a natural, becomes a sports director. And then in 1974, he becomes the communications director at the Hartford Whalers hockey team. There's real auspicious beginnings here. The Hartford Whalers, at the time, their big star was Gordie Howe, and he was like larger than life. He had his own business interests, and Bill starts working for him personally as well, and his family. And all's going well until Memorial Day weekend, 1978, when Bill gets a call from the Hartford Whalers that he's being fired as communications director. And then he gets another call from Gordie's wife, actually saying, yeah, and we're firing you from the family as well. Ooh. Rough day. I couldn't verify this, but I believe his son, Scott Rasmussen, who had dropped out of college, was pretty young in his early 20s, was also working at the Hartford Whalers, also gets fired that day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Too many eggs in one basket.
A lot of eggs in one basket. But, you know, they're pretty optimistic guys. They decide that father and son, they're going to team up, figure out what's next. So the first call they place is to a local guy. They're in Hartford's in Connecticut, right? Yeah, they're in Connecticut. Local guy in Connecticut who is an insurance agent named Ed Egan. He's working for Aetna. This leads to ESPN, we promise. And Ed...
This went from like the most exciting episode ever to like the strangest, most boring episode.
Yeah, the strangest, most boring episode. But we promise there's more to come. Ed, just like Bill when he was a weatherman, he really wants to get into sports. And he's been trying to convince Bill to start a cable network focused on Connecticut sports. And this is when Bill was, of course, the communications director at the Whalers. And the centerpiece he thought would be showing the Whalers games on this new cable channel. Bill calls him up and he's like, hey, I just got fired. I'm looking for something to do. What do you think?
I like your idea. I may not be as helpful anymore as I used to be able to.
And but Ed is undaunted. They chat and they decide like, okay, well, we're not going to get the Whalers, but like they're still pretty interesting. Like people care about local sports. We can show Connecticut sports. We probably just need some stuff to kind of fill in the gaps between Connecticut sports. There's not enough of that. So why don't we add some entertainment programming as well? And then they're like, oh, this is perfect. We've got the perfect name for this. It's going to be the Entertainment and Sports Programming Company, ESP. Like, what could, like, it's perfect.
It's very descriptive. It's short. It's only 3 letters.
Exactly. You know, it's just like ABC, NBC, ESP.
ESP.
ESP. So they incorporate the company, the Entertainment and Sports Programming Company, on July 14th, 1978. And it's worth taking a step back here. I mentioned earlier that cable is kind of the... it's like the internet of the time, like where all the entrepreneurs are heading at this point in the late 70s. So at this point, it's less than 20% of US households have cable. The big over-the-air terrestrial broadcasting companies, you know, NBC, ABC, CBS, they're still what people think of when they think of television.
UHF, VHF, over-the-air waves.
Exactly. You've got the big rabbit ear antennas, you know, on top of TVs and on top of houses. And cable really got started as a delivery mechanism for houses in rural parts of the U.S. where the terrestrial broadcast signals didn't reach.
Which is amazing in its own right to think about, gosh, we can't reach this over the airwaves, so we will run a cable.
We're literally going to run a cable there.
And that's more efficient. Like that's kind of mind-blowing to me that like it's more efficient than, I guess, the capex of building big radio towers is tough. And
yeah, I guess so. Well, I think... could be wrong, but I think this is also part of like they ran cables along railroad lines, right? And that was for telegraphs, but they might also then use that for...
I know that was like Sprint's beginnings that we talked about on the Sprint T-Mobile
episode. By this time, by the late 70s, people had started to realize, there's something slightly more interesting here than just rebroadcasting the big 3 stations. Like this, what's cool about cable is it's not regulated. So like over the air broadcasting,
that is cool.
Yeah, that like is kind of like the internet. You know, you can ABC, NBC, CBS, like they're basically controlled by the government. They're not controlled by the government, but they're regulated on what they can show, what they can say. But cable's the Wild West. And so HBO was the first kind of cable network, got launched in 1975, a couple years earlier. And then there's this crazy guy who's going to resurface down in Atlanta named Ted Turner. He owns a bunch of broadcast stations, and he's experimenting. He's like, well, I'm going to take my Atlanta station, and I'm just going to rebroadcast it all around the country. And everybody's going to get my Atlanta. See, he had bought the Atlanta Braves baseball team. We're going to show Braves games to everybody. It's going to be great. So people are experimenting. It's against the backdrop of all this that the Rasmussens and Egan, they're digging in. And they hear about this new kind of sustaining technology, if you will, in Clay Christensen terms, that's coming along for the cable industry called satellite transmission. And it's supposed to be this like great new thing. They have no idea what it is. They're just like, great, we're starting a new cable network. We want some of that satellite stuff. So they find out that RCA, the big electronics company, they've just launched 2 satellites into space for video transmission. So the Rasmussens, they call up RCA and they're like, hey, we want some of this satellite stuff. Will you sell it to us? RCA, they're trying to sell satellite space. Nobody's bought it yet. So like, oh great, we got a customer. Great, we can sell you that. What do you guys, you ESP guys, what do you want to show?
You must be, traditional media folks, like you know about this. We assumed there would be this mad rush of all these media people that wanted to use them. So, take your deep media background and pitch us.
Yeah, pitch us. What are you going to show? And they're like, Connecticut sports. and the RCA guys are like, so the thing about satellite, like what it does is it takes a video signal and it instantaneously transmits it all around the world. So you think Connecticut sports are going to be...
and entertainment.
And entertainment are going to be what people want to see all around the world. And they're like, huh. And then RCA is like, and there's this other thing too that, with satellite, like it doesn't go down, it's up 24/7. So like whatever you put on this video feed is going to go out 24/7. And this is like kind of blows their minds because at this point, before satellite, cable and satellite, the broadcast networks and even most cable networks that were using satellite, they signed off at like 11 o'clock Eastern. So like people used to, this is crazy. I mean, this is before our time, but like, our parents' generation, you'd watch TV, it'd get to be 11 o'clock. And then, NBC, CBS, they'd be like, well, we're signing off for the night.
TV was done.
Yep.
TV was over for the day.
And then you just get like a test pattern on the screen. So they're sitting in this meeting and they're like, interesting. So how much would it cost to get a feed on one of your satellites. And they're like $35,000 a month, actually $34,167 a month. And so they're like, done, we'll take it. They have no money at this point. Like, send us the invoice.
Net 30? Can we have like net 90?
Yeah. How about net 180? So they go back and they're like, okay, great. Now we got to scramble some money together. We got to not only pay RCA for space on their satellite transponder, but we need to set up like a whole studio to broadcast. We need to buy some satellite dishes to broadcast. Where are we going to do that, and how are we going to get the money? Turns out there's a town nearby called Bristol, Connecticut,
which ESPN aficionados know as still the home of the worldwide leader in sports.
Yeah, worldwide headquarters. The town had this big open space, bunch of acres that they were looking to lease out to a commercial business, and it's just a field, like a muddy field, and but it's nearby. And so they say, great.
And do you know what it was before it was a field?
I didn't find that.
It was a dump. ESPN's headquarters today are still built on an old dump.
On an old dump. Amazing. The most valuable media business in the entire world.
Yep. And what's interesting about that is, since there's no like trees that are growing there, it's this big wide open thing. It's actually perfect for broadcasting satellite because it's a complete clear shot.
Exactly. They talk about this. They'd actually first looked at another nearby town, but they couldn't get enough space, and they didn't have a clear line of sight for the satellites. So obviously the dump in Bristol was the perfect spot. Also, just like RCA, they lease this land. They have no money. And they start a plan to build the studios and truck in some satellite dishes. So they go out and they hit the fundraising trail. They raise their seed round, a little bit of money from other members of the Rasmussen family. And they get a venture capitalist in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, of all places, just like right where I grew up.
Silicon Prussia.
Yeah, Silicon Prussia, who invests, I think, the exact amount of 1 month of the RCA lease, so like $34,000. And so like, okay, great, this will get us going for like a little bit of time. Let's hit the fundraising trail for real and go get some real dollars to fund this whole thing.
And interestingly, I was thinking about what their pitch must have looked like. So 20% of the US had cable at this point. So they're very much doing the same sort of philosophy and pitch that Netflix was doing when Netflix started, starting this DVD-based business when no one yet had DVD players. It's like, oh, we're right on this inflection point. Everyone's about to have cable. Like we timed it perfectly.
Yep. And indeed they did. But also, just like Netflix in the beginning, all the sources of investment dollars at this point, they're looking at these guys and they're like, no.
We're going to need some very protective provisions in these documents.
Yes, exactly. That's anyone who's even interested. For a long weeks, months, nobody's interested. They end up getting connected somehow with the Getty family in Los Angeles. So like, listeners, if you've been to LA, you've been to the Getty Museum, which is an amazing art museum in LA.
You might know of Getty Images, the stock image site, which is one of the sons or nephews. But of course, the big behemoth and true sort of moneymaker and parent of the Getty Empire
is Getty Oil.
Yeah.
And the family is just like nuts. They're crazy stories that we won't get into here, but like, this is a family business in every sense of the word. And one of the things that they're trying to do at the time, this is again 1978, they're trying to, as much as possible, diversify out of the oil business. The family's going through generational transfer. They're looking for ways to get their money out of oil and diversify it. And so this comes along and they're like, well, okay, why not? And there's a guy, Stuart Evie, who works for the family, who he's really like the champion of getting this done. So they start talking to the Rasmussens about funding this, and they're like pretty interested. The deal's taking a while, though, and the Getty board and the senior family members, they're like, are these guys for real? Like, who are these guys? Bill,
ESP, that doesn't even have a good ring to it.
Yeah. Bill realizes he needs to prove that they have something that like is gonna, once they get the money and get all this live, that they have like really compelling content to put on the channel. So he flies to Shawnee Mission, Kansas. Ben, do you know what is in Shawnee Mission,
I have no
Kansas?
idea. No.
The headquarters of the NCAA.
Ah.
Indeed. And so in March of 1979, they're still negotiating with Getty, and Bill emerges from Kansas with a deal in hand, signed deal with the NCAA to air all of their championships across all sports and regular season games across 18 sports. Everything, including the then super prestigious men's basketball tournament, the NCAA tournament. I think the year before was the Magic Johnson and Larry Bird faced off in the...
How on earth? As I was doing research, it became apparent that they would have a hard time getting pro sports rights. So they're like, we'll go with amateur. But like the NCAA at the time, it was no small thing.
No, it was like, man, college football was huge. Bill, great entrepreneurial fashion, manages to get this contract. So he gets rights to every game that hasn't already been given to the big three networks. But that turns out that that's a lot of games, because even in the NCAA tournament, the big three networks were only showing like the Final Four. So all the games leading up to it, they thought nobody cared about them. Turns out they were wrong. So Bill emerges with this contract, and then immediately after, that gets Getty across the line. They invest $15 million, which is going to be enough to pay RCA for a couple of years, build out the Bristol facility, get the satellite dishes, hire the first talent.
I think that what they bought was 85%.
Well, yeah, so, okay, this is what I was going to get into. They invest $15 million for 85% of the company. So, like, listeners out there, man, you think VCs are rough today.
It's a tough Series A.
Yeah, that is a... Now, $15 million was a lot of money. So to be fair, it was kind of like doing your seed A, B, and C rounds all at once, but still.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is, do you know what else happened as a part of that financing? There's a commercial agreement as well, but not with Getty.
Are you referring to the beer agreement?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Do you want to take it?
I will. Yeah, so Anheuser-Busch came to an agreement with ESP. This is still before it was ESPN. It's the largest advertising contract in cable television history at $1.38 million that they will be the exclusive beer advertiser on the new ESP network. And there's some quote that one of the executives there had where they say something like, because we just thought, beer and sports just go together.
This will come back in one sec on the day it goes live later in the fall. But before they go live, after they sign this deal, I couldn't find out who kind of initiates this, but somebody, whether it's Getty or Anheuser-Busch or somebody within ESP, they're like, guys, this ESP thing, it sounds kind of corny, and it doesn't sound super professional.
And it's confusing because three-letter acronyms are,
The
broadcast
companies.
channels. Yeah,
exactly. So they started looking out, and other cable networks that were getting started at the time, they all called themselves networks. It was like the .ly domain name of or labs or whatever. Yeah,
which is fascinating because we have all sorts of different definitions for network today. It doesn't quite make sense of why you would call your one sort of channel that runs across a cable a network. I guess because all the endpoint homes were networked to over cable to the one broadcast source. But
maybe it was that they had affiliate distribution agreements with different cable operators throughout the country. That could be, which we'll get into in a minute here too. Anyway, everybody loves it. They say, great, we're going to change the name of the company. We are now the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network, ESPN.
The worldwide leader.
Worldwide leader.
And actually, I think there was a brief period there where they changed it to ESPN TV. It was like ESPN TV, and ESPN. They were like, "Oh, wait, we can't launch with that."
Yeah, that's too much. That's too much. Let's go with ESPN. So they end up launching with ESPN. Also, before they launched, though, remember Getty just bought way more than controlling interest in this company, 85%.
You're now an oil company subsidiary.
Yeah, exactly. And if you know anything about, the history of investing in startup ventures and what investors did back then, the popular thing to do was fire the founders and bring in professional management. And Getty, in wanting to act like a true venture capitalist at the time, that is what they did. Now, in this case, it's debatable whether they did this because they felt like they should or because it was the right thing. Probably both. The Rasmussens were amazing entrepreneurs. I mean, getting that NCAA contract was like Nobody else could have done that
Right.
except somebody who was a true entrepreneur, and Ed Egan too. But they weren't really equipped to build out a media empire.
And to illustrate that point, so they got sold by these cable guys that they should spend all this money on a satellite transponder. And the way that they sort of orchestrated getting that all connected, apparently, and this is like ESPN urban legend, the cable was connected to the satellite only 5 minutes prior to the first broadcast.
I
So like
believe it.
not exactly sort of like operational experts in this industry,
I believe it.
but extremely enterprising entrepreneurs.
Extremely. So that summer, the Getty family basically forces Bill and Scott and Ed to kind of step back from day-to-day involvement. They make Bill the chairman of the company, but it's kind of in name only. He ends up leaving fully the next year in 1980. But they bring in this guy, Chet Simmons. And Chet was a legend. He had been president of NBC Sports at NBC. And they convince him to come in and take over as president of ESPN. And he brings along with him this guy named Scotty Connell, who was his kind of number two at NBC Sports and who was responsible for all talent. And the two of them, they bring into ESPN even before launch and then in the first few months after launching, like some names you might have heard of: George Grand, who, depending on your age, you may or may not have heard of, Chris Berman, Dick Vitale, Bob Lee, Greg Gumbel, amazing talent into this brand new startup cable network.
And almost all these guys, except for Dick Vitale, are like 23 to 26.
Yep.
So like the Chris, we all sort of like know of Chris Berman today. I think Bob Lee was 23.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Young, super young hotshot broadcasting crew.
Yep. They were absolute pros at identifying and nurturing talent.
Yep.
So September 7th, 1979, they go live. And the first show that they had talked about this before launching. They thought, we're going to have sports. They decided to drop the entertainment. I don't know if that was the Rasmussens or if that was when Chet Simmons came on board. And they made this we're going to be 24/7, the world's first 24/7 cable network and first 24/7 sports destination.
It's kind of amazing. They kept the E, even though they decided before launch they were never going to be anything besides sports.
But they thought the linchpin to all of this would be they would do a half-hour highlights show at 6:30 p.m., kind of right in the middle of prime time every day. They're going to do this every day, and they would recap the highlights and the scores of all the sporting events in the country throughout the day. This was like super innovative because the only way to get sports scores was if your weatherman decided to read it on your local TV channel or to open up the paper the next morning. Yeah. And even opening up the paper next morning, the paper went to print in the East Coast before the West Coast games were done. So there was no way to get scores real time. They thought this would be like kind of the linchpin to all of it. And they decided, it's like the center of the day. It's the sports center. And so when they launched at 6:30 p.m. on September 7th, 1979, the first thing that went live was Sports Center.
Yep.
And it was beamed via satellite to 1.4 million U.S. households on day one. And the network has been going ever since.
Lee Leonard and George Grand on for 30 minutes.
Followed by an incredible
what a lineup.
Fast-paced action of a slow-pitch softball game. The teams of which were I didn't write down. It was two other beer companies that the teams that was their names.
Oh, no way.
It was not Budweiser. And so they got into a huge row with Anheuser-Busch, which had just paid them $1.4 million. And then on the first broadcast.
I think they had wrestling, they had some college soccer. Like it was a long night following Sports Center.
It was a hodgepodge, shall we say.
We will put this link in the show notes, and we just tweeted out a link before recording this episode too, with just some sort of photographs of the whole thing. You have to watch this like first few minutes of the first Sports Center broadcast to understand how different it was than the Sports Center today.
Yeah,
they say like, "Welcome to the Sports Center," and there's like a 5 to 10 second video clip of like zooming in on some clouds. And then there's like this weird slow pan to a guy in a studio who's sitting at the desk. And it's like,
I think it was George Grand.
Yeah, you're kind of like, whoa, you're like in an abandoned warehouse. Like this is weird. And it's all terribly colored. And it was 70s television.
And apparently there was no air conditioning in the studio.
But of course they have to wear suits.
And of course they have to wear suits. And so people are just like sweating. And
Not to mention 70s suits being so stuffy.
Yeah,
and
polyester.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great. It was great. So from that inauspicious beginning, again, on the back of this NCAA agreement, March comes around of 1980, they start showing the tournament games, and they had hired this guy, former coach, to be the announcer for most of the tournament games, Dick Vitale, and it just like takes off. People can't stop watching all around the country. All this, these exciting games in this single elimination tournament. This great announcer gets super excited, calling them, and people start coining. I don't know if it's attributable, who first coined the term. People start calling this March Madness. It didn't exist before 1980 when ESPN starts showing it.
And this is a theme that I want to keep sort of listening for throughout the episode is ESPN in the business of market capitalization or market creation? Mm-hmm. When I first started looking into it, I was like, wow, ESPN was like right on the crest of all these waves. Like, this is amazing. They got March Madness right as it was happening. They got,
they created March Madness.
Yeah, later on we'll get into Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. And actually what ESPN did was create a platform on which live sports entertainment could become the phenomenon that it is, rather than sitting there and capturing the phenomenon that it is.
Yep. I think it's worth a pause here. We've talked about this a little bit, but there were two real innovations that ESPN kind of had right off the bat. One that we alluded to is this concept of 24 hours. Like, they were the first 24-hour television network. Obviously, Ted Turner was rebroadcasting the Atlanta Superstation, but CNN hadn't launched yet. And like, what's crazy is like the media business, you got to think back to then, like it was headquartered in New York, and all anybody thought about was the East Coast prime time. So again, this, the sign off at 11 p.m. Eastern, that's 8 o'clock on the West Coast.
It probably really benefited. I mean, I know Bristol, Connecticut is not too far from New York, but it really probably benefited them to be sort of out in the middle of nowhere and not caught up in sort of the groupthink of how do you run a media company in the city.
I think a huge portion of the cable penetration at that point was in the middle of the country and on the West Coast. Again, where like the whole media industry and the broadcast industry hadn't built up as much. So that was one. And then two, there were other, sort of niche cable stations out there. There were lots of crazy things happening. I feel like ESPN was the first really huge niche community that got built. And I mean niche in terms of like a hyper focus on one thing that like lots of people are passionate about, not niche in terms of small. Because like the broadcast networks, they did everything. Like NBC Sports, that was a small portion of what NBC did.
Right.
Whereas ESPN was like just one thing, and they started creating this community, around it.
So it's interesting, like the notion of like the internet as infinite shelf space or as sort of infinite pages in your newspaper.
Yeah.
Like cable was the first time. We always make fun of cable. It's like, oh, there's only 50 cable stations. The internet has infinite. But like going from 3 to 50 was kind
huge.
of, there were still some pretty big niches available for you to own.
Yeah, totally. So on the back of this and the innovation they were driving around it, like March Madness and the like, they also got the NFL draft in April, and they made the NFL draft a thing. Like it was never broadcast before ESPN, and they were always trying to get into the NFL, and this was the first thing that they could get was the draft.
NFL throws them a bone.
NFL's
Like, you can't have any of our games. Certainly not the Super Bowl, but here, take the draft.
Take the draft, right? And they made it into like, an appointment viewing an event and the clock and everything.
Yep.
So a couple years later, they're growing like gangbusters.
Also, don't forget, in '83, they did have the USFL.
That's right. That's right. There was a period in time where there were a few leagues competing with the NFL in the U.S. around this point.
Yeah, and I think the AFL may have been a separate league and then got folded into the NFL
they merged,
and created the AFC and the NFC.
There were one or two others as well.
Yeah, and I think the USFL was around for 3 years. The ESPN got exclusive rights to it. They were like, "Oh my God, this is going to be huge. We're going to blow!" And then ESPN has definitely had some for as much as they've sort of bet correctly and created waves. They definitely have also had some that just sort of fell apart.
Part of what happened, think this is right. So Chet Simmons, who had come in to replace Bill as president from NBC Sports, after 3 years, he left and he became commissioner of the USFL. And I think that's what kind of got that relationship going. But yeah, despite that, growth was great. And a few years later, they're in like 1982 at this point. They're growing. They're adding more cable operators that are carrying ESPN. They're adding more advertisers, but all this is costing money. And of course, they're covering more events. That costs money. They're at a point where they're burning $8 million a month in 1982. And Getty...
3 years after they start broadcasting.
3 years after they start, yeah. And Getty is financing all of these losses because they own the business. It's not like they're out raising money because they already own the business.
Right.
They're getting pretty nervous, though. They don't like this. And as we mentioned already, the family is starting to think about like, hey, we might need to exit this whole thing.
We're not actually sure why we did it in the first place.
Yeah, well, this whole thing and their oil business as well, which will come up in a sec. So in 1982, the Getty family sells a 10% stake in ESPN to ABC to help offset some of these losses. And I don't
It's like they're a broadcasting company. It kind of makes sense. They could be helpful here.
Yeah, exactly. Help professionalize this thing.
Yeah.
And Chet, who had come from NBC, had just left. So they do that. Now, that was a pretty bad move. I don't remember exactly how much they sold it for. It wasn't that much money.
And it came with the right for ABC to buy a majority share later on. Kind of like the Disney BAMTech deal that we talked about earlier in probably season 1 or something. But
Yep. That was back in season 1. Wow. Yeah. Because right around that time, ESPN comes up with a third super critical innovation. And that is that they changed the business model for cable. So up until this point, when ESPN first started and they were going out to all these local cable operators all throughout the country, they were having to pitch them to carry this channel in their lineup. And for most of them, they said, yeah, great, like I'll carry it if you pay me. So ESPN was actually paying most of their operators to carry the channel.
And then you get sponsors to offset the cost that you have to pay for distribution.
Right. So a couple of people at this point come in. So Chet Simmons leaves. A new president comes in from CBS, Bill Grimes. So now ESPN has DNA from NBC, ABC, and CBS, all in the executive ranks. And another guy starts like right out of college, a super young guy named George Bodenheimer. And he starts as a driver. Like literally he would drive to the Hartford airport, pick up all the talent that's coming back from like broadcasting these games all around the country, bring them into the studio in ESPN. And he kind of gets to know everybody. And he quickly moves into affiliate relationships. So now he's going out, flying around the country and talking to these cable operators. And he starts to realize like, hey, ESPN is like the customers of these cable operators, they love it. They can't get enough. If they didn't
Why are we paying them?
Yeah, if they didn't have it, they would revolt. What if we flip the script on these cable operators and we say, yeah, I know we've been paying you, but like now you got to pay us. And if you don't pay us, we'll pull the signal from you. Oof. And so this happens a couple times. And
this has happened in a few sort of instrumental moments in businesses in history where they realize, wait a minute, we're actually doing them more of a favor than they're doing us. And you can actually successfully reverse the flow of money.
We cannot overstate how important this was to ESPN and to the entire cable network industry, all the cable industry. This completely changes everything. So much so that George Bodenheimer, years later in the 90s, under Disney, after Disney acquires what ESPN would become, he becomes the president of ESPN.
Pretty good idea, I guess.
Pretty good idea. So they pull the plug on a couple stations, and exactly that happens. All the subscribers of these cable distributors, they start revolting. They start like picketing. They start showing up at the offices, like demanding ESPN back.
All right. So basically, if we want to take this to business school, basically what happened is the end customer developed a stronger relationship with a supplier to the cable provider than the cable provider itself, and would sort of, they were provider agnostic and would go wherever that supplier was. And so if you're the cable networks, like, is there anything you could have done to prevent this?
You mean the cable distributors?
Yeah. Is there anything you could have done to prevent this sort of disintermediation of you where you become commodity and the real value is content? And really the question is here, there's two ways to create a ton of value: own the linchpin of content, or own the linchpin of distribution.
Yep.
And I suppose they needed to maintain a monopoly on distribution in order to secure that they would be the only game in town to have access to that content. And as soon as they became commoditized and what people viewed as unique was the content, they were going to get,
I think this was probably inevitable. I mean, the same thing played out with the internet, right? Like in the first boom of the internet, remember telecom companies were so highly valued and like ISPs and all that, and they controlled distribution and blah, blah, blah. And AOL was this integrated provider. They were an ISP and content company. But, fast forward to today and like Netflix, Google, what Facebook, what have you, are exponentially more valuable than Comcast, whoever's providing the pipes, Verizon or whomever to the home or for wireless. So yeah, this is pretty big. The first big deal that ESPN does with a very large cable provider, where the cable provider pays them, was with Cablevision, the Dolans, the Dolan family in Long Island,
who went on to own the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, and the New York Knicks and many other, and Madison Square Garden. Anyway.
But mostly the Cleveland Indians.
They do a deal where Cablevision is now going to pay ESPN 10 cents per subscriber for every Cablevision subscriber. And that's the dawn of the affiliate fee era.
Beginning ESPN's real behemoth business model.
And that becomes 2/3 of ESPN's revenue over time. Shortly after this, by 1983, ESPN has now become the biggest cable network in the US, and not just the biggest, but the only one that's like making money from the cable providers in addition to advertising. In January 1984, we'd mentioned the Getty family woes. They end up selling the whole thing, Getty Oil, to Texaco for $10 billion. And Texaco, of course, is this huge oil conglomerate. They're not a family-run business. And they you guys have all the, there's all this stuff that comes with Getty Oil. Yeah, we got to get rid of this thing. So turns out there was a guy on Texaco's board named Tom Murphy. And Tom Murphy was the president of a little company called Capital Cities. Indeed. Ben, what was Capital Cities?
Boy, so Capital Cities, it is worth winding back the clock to understand what Capital Cities is and just what an incredible business story this is. So Capital Cities started with Tom Murphy in 1954 when he was recruited to run a struggling TV station called WTEN in Albany, New York after graduating from Harvard Business School. So Murphy was a lean operator, and he was able to get the station to profitability by 1957. So just a few years after taking over, it's sort of new ownership, he's new management. They lean it out and make it profitable. So he and the owner, Frank Smith, then decided to buy 2 more stations over the next couple of years in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Providence, Rhode Island, and Capital Cities Broadcasting was born. So,
is it capital of these states? Is that the...
I think so. I mean, Providence, I think is. Albany definitely is. I think Raleigh is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Things we didn't
I always wondered where the capital came from.
Yeah. So Murphy, of course, he's got responsibilities across Capital Cities. He needs to get out of running this Albany station, so he needs to hire someone to do that. He hires Dan Burke, who's another HBS grad, also no broadcast experience, but really clear, linear thinker, trusts him. I think it's an intro from one of their brothers or something like that. So hires him to run that station. So from this day forward, the DNA of Capital Cities was set. They were completely bottom line driven, super lean, and they were very decentralized. So what was important was that if you think about sort of the Berkshire Hathaway style of management, we're not going to have a big, central staff. We trust the managers
Tom
to run
and everybody,
their businesses.
they're just you guys run the stations.
Yep.
We're allocating capital here.
Exactly. So Murphy and Burke were a fantastic duo over the next several years, with Murphy, who became CEO, as kind of the master strategist and the capital allocator, and Burke, who was the COO, the lean, mean operator, sort of this dream team of executives. So throughout the 70s and through sort of the mid-80s, they operated a super calculated strategy of expanding across local TV stations, some newspapers, and in this new cable medium, buying some cable stations all across the country.
Cable distributors, right? So they're starting to buy up
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, it was distributors of they're much smaller than Cablevision, but the types of folks that, ESPN as a network is then going out and doing these affiliate agreements with.
Exactly. And another sort of tenet here is they only expanded within their media and publishing vertical, while others in the industry like CBS were embracing sort of an 80s era conglomerate mentality really hard. They were buying minor league baseball teams. They were taking limos around town,
Just wait till we get to RJR Nabisco.
Capital cities, their playbook was extremely simple. They would buy a station, they would operate it leanly and profitably, so they would get some great cash flow from it. Then, with those nice cash flows and on their ability to show those cash flows, they would raise some debt capital at favorable terms. Then they would go buy another station. Then they would quickly pay down that debt that they used, and then they would expand. Lather, rinse, repeat to dozens and dozens and dozens across the U.S. And they weren't big on PR. They weren't people still don't really know the name Capital Cities. It was kind of this almost sleeping giant of just really well executed, disciplined businessmen. They were totally obsessed with decentralization. They actually printed on their annual report every year, decentralization is the cornerstone of our philosophy. Our job is to hire the best people we can, give them all the responsibility and authority to perform their jobs. David, is this where I can take us through in January of 1986, they made one very unconventional acquisition?
Well, before we get to that.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So we just mentioned, Texaco had just bought Getty, and Tom Murphy, the CEO of Capital Cities, is on the Texaco board. So Bill Grimes, the new president of ESPN, who'd come from CBS, he figures all this out. And so he's like, all right, he's worried about his job. He's worried about ESPN. What's going to happen to it as part of Texaco?
Yep.
He goes to see Tom. And he says, Tom's based in New England, just like him. He says, hey, you should buy ESPN. You're on the board of Texaco. They don't want this. They want to get rid of it. You should buy ESPN. It's a natural fit. We're the best cable network out there. You own cable distributors. You own all this stuff. Keep it decentralized. Do all this. Tom says, that's a great idea. I just can't do it right now. I'm working on something bigger.
And this is a trademark Tom Murphy thing where he would know exactly what price he wanted to pay for something. He would know exactly how operationally efficient he could run it afterwards, and he wouldn't pay $1 more.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where he would look at it, and then it was just obvious to him, nope, sorry, it looks great, but no, not right now.
So, but he has this master plan. He's working on something bigger to come in one sec, but he's on the board of Texaco. Texaco starts a bidding process for ESPN. They're divesting the company. There are two main parties who are interested in buying it. One is Ted Turner down in Atlanta. He's I think CNN has launched at this point. So he's the canonical cable entrepreneur. He's the
It turned out it wasn't Atlanta sports that people wanted to watch nationwide, but it was a cable news.
And so he sees ESPN. ESPN's bigger and is and in fact the 24-hour aspect of CNN was copied from ESPN. And so he's like, great, I want to own ESPN. He's like putting together bids. The other interested party is ABC. ABC, they already have this 10% stake that they owned in ESPN, an option for more. So the first thing they do, they buy 5% more from Getty and Texaco. So they get up to a 15% stake. I'm not sure why they did that or how much they paid for it, but they do that. Bidding's going back and forth between them and Turner. And again, remember, Tom Murphy's on the board of Texaco. Somehow, ABC ends up winning the deal. Now, they probably would have anyway because they already own 15% of the company and had the inside track. Anyway, they buy the remaining 85% that they don't own of ESPN from Texaco, Getty, and the Rasmussens still owned their original 15%. They buy it all out. They now own 100% of ESPN.
Which I think is the first and last time that somebody owned 100% of ESPN.
Yeah. Well, the first time was when the Rasmussens started it.
Yeah.
And then this is now the only moment in history where ESPN is wholly owned by ABC. They pay $188 million for the 85% that they don't own.
And remember, it was valued at like $18 million when Getty sort of first bought it. And then, of course, put a ton of cash into it along the way.
Hey, 10x. We'll take it. It's like the 10-cent episode. Yeah, 10x. I'll hit that bid.
Yeah.
Again, for like the reasons that are completely unknown and just terrible decision. For some reason, ABC, remember, Tom Murphy has no control over ABC at this point. They turn around immediately and they resell 20% of ESPN to RJR Nabisco.
I thought it was Hearst.
No. Hearst then buys it from Nabisco. This is crazy. This is nuts. This is where.
Can you elaborate on the RJR part of Nabisco?
Yeah. Okay. So Nabisco, people probably, at least our U.S. listeners probably know Nabisco. They think it's like a cookies and crackers, and it's a CPG company. It's like Procter and Gamble or whatever. They had merged with R.J. Reynolds. What's R.J. Reynolds? Sounds innocuous. Turns out R.J. Reynolds is a tobacco company. Camels, Winston's, Salem's. They're headquartered in Winston-Salem. It's the biggest U.S. cigarette company. And at the time, cigarettes were, a big thing. And they would become embroiled in all sorts of lawsuits. But because, they had, of course, their CPG products to sell, but mostly these cigarettes that they're trying to pump out to the U.S., they had all of these spokespeople who were professional athletes.
Oh, my God.
And in particular, one of their strongest channels for advertising cigarettes was NASCAR and professional racing. And ESPN had really put NASCAR on the map. So NASCAR was one of these kind of backwater sports that ESPN, as they were starting, like they needed content, they really kind of elevated. And so RJR Nabisco was super interested in ESPN, thought they would have this great synergistic relationship. They end up buying this 20% stake from ABC.
It was something like ABC did that to like free up cash. Like they wanted cash for some reason.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they did it. I mean, it was a terrible idea on so many levels. So now, and Tom Murphy, meanwhile, must have been just
watching this,
face palming, watching all of this, because his grand plan soon gets revealed.
Yeah. So in January of '86, this is their, they made a series of very conventional small acquisitions that, were in total something to write home about, but individually nothing to write home about. This is very different. So with the help of some financing from Warren Buffett, who sort of identifies the twinkle of a soul in another in Tom Murphy.
Very simpatico.
Yes. Invests both debt and equity. And Capital Cities executes a $3.5 billion purchase of ABC and all their related broadcast assets in New York, Chicago, and LA. The Wall Street Journal runs the headline the next morning, "Minnow swallows whale."
And this is in the beginning of 1985. So months after all of this went down with ESPN and ABC and Nabisco.
So why would they even need to raise the debt capital to do this? Capital Cities itself was not even worth $3.5 billion at the time. So even if they sold every single share in their company to buy ABC, they would not have been able to raise enough money. And in fact, this purchase was the largest non-oil and gas transaction in business history to this point, which is like, we're watching WhatsApp get picked up for 20 bill. This $3.5 billion, completely unheard of outside of oil and gas.
Completely unheard of.
So just to kind of close the loop here in capital cities, Murphy and Burke had the track record to show that they could run this same playbook and bring in, the operating margins that they were used to of over 50% with all the capital cities properties to ABC, which was currently in the low 30s. And so indeed they did this, they generated a ton of cash, and they were able to pay back all that debt in less than 3 years, which was earlier than expected. And so 3 years out, suddenly capital cities is not, under all this debt anymore. It's looking really good.
And remember, ABC, again, which had just acquired ESPN.
Yep.
ABC broadcasting, they only made revenue from advertising. They weren't getting these affiliate fees from the cable operators. ESPN now, they're getting to this the importance of operating
that's the real jewel
margins.
of this
Yeah, that's
acquisition.
the jewel. Like they're getting, as we said, affiliate fees become twice as big as advertising for ESPN over time. They're getting, it's so much a better business.
Yep. So, of course, Capital Cities takes the name of ABC because, they own it. It's an unbelievable brand. It was really much more of a sort of reverse acquisition for ABC. So their culture, product, headcount, balance sheet, everything looked much more like Capital Cities than it ever did ABC, even though the company is sort of called ABC now. So crazy aside, before finishing this up, Dan Burke's son, Steve Burke, also rose to prominence through Disney and then through the media industry. He's now, in 2019, the current CEO of NBC Universal.
I know. Crazy.
It's a total dynasty.
Crazy.
It's worth noting, so a decade later, well, actually, I'll come back to this as we dip into Disney here a little bit.
Well, so that transaction gets done with Capital Cities, minnow swallowing the whale of ABC in March of 1985. Immediately, remember Nabisco, they're trying to pump out these cigarettes. They go see Tom Murphy and say, oh, hey, you really wanted ABC, right? You didn't want this ESPN thing. Let us just buy it all out from you. We'll pay you $500 million for it. and actually, that probably was really hard to turn down for Tom and Capital Cities because they just, raised all this debt to buy ABC.
Right.
Nabisco thinks they're going to get it. But, Tom is smarter than that. And he says, thank you very much for your offer. I am going to turn it down. But, that's pretty incredible. Nabisco is willing to pay $500 million for ESPN. I think it was valuing it at $500 million.
And what's the time frame from when?
This was 1985, and it was just before in 1984 when ABC had bought it for $188 million for 85%.
Wow.
So, people are starting to realize the
What they have
value
here.
in this thing.
Yeah.
1986 was a huge year for ESPN on the business side. Together now with ABC, all under one house, they get ABC and ESPN together under Capital Cities. They get NFL rights for the first time.
Boom.
Boom. And this is, Ben, as you were alluding to, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football. It becomes huge. And not only that, the business innovation at ESPN, we can't overstate how important it was. They've already started extracting fees from cable operators. They had to pay a ton of money to get the NFL rights. The NFL, of course, knew how valuable this was.
But it was nowhere near sort of the crazy prices that it is today.
But still, for the time, it was a lot of money. What does ESPN do? They go back to their cable operators and they say, hey, we just acquired these rights. This is going to be, ESPN was already super valuable. Now it's going to be astronomically valuable. But it cost us a lot of money to do this. We're actually going to, the amount that we paid for these rights, we're going to push it down to you and we're going to increase your affiliate fees commensurately to offset 100% of the cost that we're paying for these rights.
And there's, of course, nothing that those cable affiliates can do.
They can't do, and there's a whole big showdown. And again, a couple of them say, we're not doing that. We walk. And within weeks, their subscribers are calling them up. They're petitioning. They're canceling. They have no leverage.
And to give you a sense, it's been sort of climbing. I think originally we talked about it being 10 cents. 2013, it rises to $5. I think it may have risen to somewhere in sort of the $8 range. It's really, over time, it really grows.
Yeah. And on the back of it, to give you a sense, that is, by this time, they are over the carriage fees, the per subscriber fees that cable operators are paying ESPN is over 5 times any other channel out there. CNN, what have you, A&E, all these other cable channels. ESPN just dwarfs all of them.
Yeah. ESPN is the thing people watch on cable, and ESPN knows it.
Yeah.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So, okay, quickly back to RJR Nabisco, our tobacco peddling friends. If you are familiar with the Warren Buffett type of history, not Warren himself, but private equity and leveraged buyouts, you might know a little bit about the most infamous deal that the firm KKR ever did, which was in 1989. They do the largest LBO in history, leveraged buyout in history. They acquire RJR Nabisco for $24.5 billion. And this becomes the subject of the book Barbarians at the Gate. Classic book, also got made into a movie. We should note here, too, a lot of the history that we're taking for ESPN comes from a great book. Those guys have all the fun. Focus is really more on kind of the cultural history of ESPN, but it's just so great. Like oral histories and interviews with everyone. It has a bunch of the business history, too. So Nabisco gets acquired by KKR. They take out an insane amount of debt to finance this thing, like absolutely insane. They start selling off assets to start paying down the debt. And one of the things that they sell off is their 20% stake at this point in ESPN that they sell to the Hearst Corporation for $175 million. Oof.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Hearst got a deal.
People just like, especially these non-media businesses that owned parts of ESPN, they just do not understand the value.
Well, it shows a lot of that timing dictates so much in the price that these things get sold for. It's sort of like when you buy a house and suddenly like you must get rid of your house. You can't wait around for the best offer. Like you're now a seller, it's not like you're not raising right now.
Yeah,
you are very
exactly.
actively raising right
very
now.
Active. That's not a good place to be. So Hearst still to this day owns 20% of ESPN and have been repaid on their investment many hundreds of times over.
Can we talk about that? Like, we're about to get to this Disney thing, but like in everybody's head, like Disney owns ESPN. Disney owns 80% of ESPN. They operate ESPN, but Hearst still owns 20% of the freaking business.
It's crazy. Hearst they don't do anything. They're a minority shareholder. So Disney operates it. The P&L flows through to Hearst, but Hearst, of course, the William Randolph Hearst organization, the publishing magnate, subject of the movie Citizen Kane. There's other things within the Hearst Corporation now, Condé Nast and that the likes of that. But their 20% stake in ESPN is all of it, basically all the value there.
Crazy.
It's totally crazy. Especially, and the price of this deal, like by the late 80s, early 90s, like ESPN is ESPN at this point. We're talking Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann on SportsCenter, Stuart Scott, like Booyah, You got Rich Eisen and Kenny Mayne and Linda Cohn. Like, it is a cultural icon.
Yep. It's what you leave on in the living room while you're making breakfast.
Totally. Or 24/7.
Yep.
I mean, in my house growing up, it was literally like ESPN was on all day,
You and like
every day.
40 to 50 other million Americans.
I know. It was awesome. 1994, they hire the famed ad agency Wyden Kennedy, that of course had always done Nike, to do the This Is SportsCenter commercials.
So
my
good.
God. So good.
The best one ever, I think, is the Lance Armstrong cycling in the basement.
Yes. Yes.
Or LeBron's throne. You ever seen that?
Yep.
It's like it's like Stuart Scott or someone walks or LeBron tries to walk back to his cube in Bristol, and he sort of looks, and his chair is not there, and he looks in the cube next to him, and I think it's like Stuart Scott is sitting in a throne at his desk, and Stuart turns around, he's like, "Oh, sorry, is this your chair?"
So good. I mean, those guys, like, we go read. Those guys have all the fun. The book, because it really gets into all this. But just the popular culture, like you cannot understate the impact of Stuart Scott and Cool as the Other Side of the Pillow and Booyah, and just like it changed everything.
Yep.
Everything. So anyway, ESPN is crushing it through the early 90s, and then in the summer of 1995, our friend Mr. Buffett makes another reappearance.
He does, and he suggests to Tom Murphy that he should get together with Michael Eisner, who's the CEO of Disney.
This is at the Allen and Company.
Yes, when they're both in Sun Valley at the Allen and Company gathering of media and now technology, 100 millionaires and billionaires. This is amazing kind of how fast this deal got done. And so in a matter of days, they had worked out the terms, and Disney buys...
And of course, because Berkshire Hathaway is still a large investor in capital cities at this point.
Mm-hmm. Disney buys ABC, which contains capital cities, or is capital cities, and contains ESPN, for $19 billion, which represents 13x cash flow and 28x net income.
Yeah, and was, at the time, the third largest acquisition ever. Of course, the RJR Nabisco buyout had happened a few years before. That was the largest. It didn't go so well, but third largest deal ever. And of course, the cable network division of ABC Capital Cities is the jewel at this point, and of which all of that is ESPN.
Yeah, I think it's something like, of that 19 billion, I think it was something like 4 billion alone is attributable to ESPN. It may have even been more than that.
I mean, hard to say exactly. Whatever it was, by the kind of mid 2000s, the cable network division within Disney, which does include, the Disney Channel and some other things, but ESPN is 90+% of it or whatever. That is driving over 50% of all the operating profit for the Walt Disney Company. Like theme parks, movies, everything, merchandise, all of it. ESPN is over half of the profit.
Yeah, and if we really want to fast forward, and I think the modern era of ESPN is it's a different story that we should tell in its own right. But a quick snapshot. So there was an analyst estimate from an investment bank in 2015 that ESPN alone was worth $50 billion.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, really, it's funny. We did back in season 1, our Disney trilogy, which was great, and there certainly are more episodes we'll have to do to add on to that in the future. But this is the foundation of it all. Like, of course, Disney was a great company before the ABC Capital Cities deal. But like, if you look at just pure value creation within Disney, like, Lucasfilm, Pixar, Marvel, whatever they've done, in the past, like, those are peanuts compared to ESPN.
Mm-hmm. So one really interesting way to reflect back on this was a phenomenal book called The Outsiders, which is about unconventional CEOs who sort of defied what other people were doing at the time in their industry and ran their business a different way. And the first chapter is about capital cities. So super instrumental to the research for this episode. Had this great comment to give the rise of capital cities some context. If you had invested $1 with Tom Murphy when he became CEO in 1966, that dollar would be worth $204 at the time he sold to Disney. That's a remarkable 19.9% IRR over the 29 years, which significantly outpaced the S&P 500 10.1%. I mean, just continuous, maniacal, ludicrous growth.
Well, you see why Warren Buffett likes him.
Yep.
We're going to wrap up history and facts on this episode here. Ben, as I think you alluded to, at some point there is another major acquisition in the story here that happens either in the 90s or 2000s. We'll have to do the work of a company called Starwave, actually here in Seattle.
Yeah, like a mile from where we're sitting.
Yeah, which becomes, we're doing an in-person episode today, which is awesome. That becomes the backbone of all the digital assets of ESPN.
ESPN.com, fantasy, what would become the apps,
Bill
streaming.
Simmons, podcasting, all of that.
Yep.
That'll be a super fun one for another day. So, but we won't get into that here. Acquisition category for this. Okay, so which acquisition are we categorizing?
I suppose it's a business line in basically every case.
Yeah.
Because there's not that much integration that really happens here in any of these things. It's
No,
not like they're
none.
integrating a product into their sales channel. They're, of course, buying, like ESPN just had an insane amount of talent. One of their differentiators where they were an amazing sort of magnet and talent development pipeline. But like a lot of these times where we talk about plugging in a product to improve your flywheel effects, there's that to some degree. And in fact, Disney talked about, Michael Eisner at the time of this big acquisition was doing the press circuit and talking about how ESPN was a brand upon which they could apply Disney's resources and really fuel that brand to be other things. That was less successful, I think, than like ESPN Zone and all these different ESPN the magazine was fine, but like the core business is still really the carriage fees.
But
so,
ESPN didn't need Disney to do a magazine, like
right. And it's not like prominent ESPN things in the theme parks are driving a material piece of it. So to me, it was a amazing business line that with sort of the right continued management and access to capital and could kind of keep growing on its own. And the business line itself just kept getting bought.
Yeah. And even going back to the original Getty Oil investment, like that's what it was. It was diversifying out of oil. It was a business line. Like they weren't going to integrate that into the oil company.
And for folks new to the show, we have categories for this: people, technology, product, business line, asset, consolidation, or other. And that's sort of grown over time. The way that we differentiate between product and business line is, if a product would be Facebook buying Instagram and then plugging it into their existing business, this is not that. This is its own business.
Yeah. Our next section that we do is what would have happened otherwise. I was also struggling to think about this, but I actually think to me, the interesting story here is not what would have happened otherwise. It's like what should have happened otherwise, but didn't. Like, Nabisco, like cigarettes, like all that, like there were so many things along the way, like Getty Oil, like any other business that hadn't captured such huge waves and brought such huge innovations to the industry would have been capsized by all these machinations, like Getty, Texaco, RJR Nabisco, like ABC before Capital Cities. Like the management and ownership, stewardship of this company was terrible, yet it survived and thrived, I think, just because the wave it was riding was so powerful, Yeah,
I would say often really what it was amazing management under questionable ownership. And
Yes.
fortunately, a lot of the time that ownership was minority, so they could sort of continue to run the business.
Or at least acted like minority, even when they were majority.
Yeah. So I think it's almost like it really threaded the needle on managing to realize its true potential without anything disastrous happening.
Yeah. Again, these huge innovations, 24 hours, like community, and like especially around Sports Center and, and the affiliate fee business model. Like these are huge innovations.
Yep.
Tech themes?
Yeah. So my first one is a point that was made in The Outsiders. There are studies, and this kind of I think happens over and over again, that show that 2/3 of acquisitions destroy value. And of course, that's why we are doing this show, because we thought it'd be fun to cover ones that manage to not and figure out how did they manage to not destroy value. Capital Cities, over and over again, was masterful at it. So I was trying to sort of tease out what made them so good. So Murphy was able to acquire companies with confidence because the first piece is the business was already so decentralized that whenever they would acquire a company, integration would be easier because there wasn't significant integration to do. They really sort of like installed the right managers and sort of trusted them to run it. And number two was they were so efficient at growing margins in their own business and knew that sort of their playbook could do that they could effectively lower the acquisition price because they knew that they could accelerate payback. And so when they could bid higher than someone else, and of course, they didn't really end up buying a lot at auctions, but when they did identify something they wanted and they'd go after it, they know exactly what their price could be because they knew exactly what the resulting cash flows would be 5 years out, or at least could do pretty effective forecasting. So they were able to get conviction in acquiring these assets. So I just thought that was worth mentioning as we really, people often ask David and I, like, what so what have you guys learned from the show? Like, what are the things that make a technology acquisition successful? And this is one where in this particular type of business model, in this media business, running this combination of decentralized and lean really did allow them to efficiently make acquisitions that were very likely to be successful.
Yeah. It's been fun learning about capital cities and learning from you. Ben did most of the research on it. It's not a story that's oft told.
No.
Tom Murphy is, nobody knows Tom Murphy like everybody knows Warren Buffett.
Right.
But you can just learn so much from how these people have allocated capital and operated.
Yep.
My big learning from this is, in a lot of ways, this is obvious, but it hadn't really quite crystallized for me until this episode, that to get a huge generation defining company, which ESPN absolutely is, I put it in the same category as Google or Facebook or Tencent or Alibaba or whatever. It just wasn't an independent entity. This combination of you have to both ride a huge, technology wave. In this case, the technology wave was cable. Mm-hmm. But you also, if you can marry that with a business model innovation, that's how you can become just so incredibly dominant. In ESPN's case, literally 5x bigger than any other cable network.
I think you talked about this a bunch on the LP show, really digging into what is the appropriate and sort of the highest form of perfection of business model for a given medium. Mm-hmm. And can you really exploit that new piece of technology with the appropriate business model to sort of, flank an industry from the side instead of ever needing to attack anyone head on?
Totally. And I think about Tencent did this equally as well, right? They ride the wave of PC usage and then mobile, usage and penetration in China. And they marry that to a huge business model innovation with the freemium business model.
Yep.
And no one can touch them, except maybe ByteDance. That's my big one.
Well, I had, just to revisit one that we mentioned earlier, I think it is interesting reflecting back on what activities did ESPN perform that were sort of market capitalizing, effectively wave riding, and what ones did they do that were market creating. I think they mostly are in the business of market creation. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're, this even continued after, far after where this episode ends, sort of with fantasy football being the driver of why people like the NFL. I think ESPN has actually done a lot of work in creating why the NFL is a platform for American social activity. And I think
just like they did with March Madness and NASCAR and so many others.
Yep. Yeah, you can almost think of them as a platform company in the way that sort of Microsoft created a platform on which other people could make more money than Microsoft itself made in total. I think that's probably the case with ESPN too. They were just a sort of an unlock for creating a ton of value in the ecosystem.
Yeah, totally.
And then lastly, it's interesting to just reflect on the media industry and sort of there's content and there's distribution. And ESPN has always been content. And reflecting back on the Kara Swisher episode, many people have tried throughout the years, including AOL, with AOL Time Warner, to achieve the dream of marrying content with distribution. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of seeing Disney do that now in a new era where they're trying to, pull, this is again a foreshadow, but pull off of Netflix and pull off all these streaming services and introduce Disney Plus. And I think it's interesting to just look at this acquisition in the context of that eventual dream of marrying both together. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that it kind of incredible that ESPN was able to spend the money to produce the content, but then make the money from getting other people to distribute it for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about differentiated content.
Yeah. Well, and, another thing we haven't talked about here that probably wasn't as important in the time period of history where we're focusing on ESPN here, but is critical now, is the live component, especially as, everything has transitioned over the last few years to streaming and whatnot. What is the most only really remaining defensible piece of traditional television type programming? It's live. And what is the most compelling live programming? It's sports. Yep.
Yep. You want to grade it?
Let's do it. What are we grading?
I think we should grade the Disney acquisition of Capital Cities, but it's worth talking about the others too. So I think the Disney acquisition of Capital Cities was an A or an A plus or something, and we can talk about that. The Capital Cities acquisition of ABC is whatever we decide for Disney is the same thing for Capital Cities acquiring ABC, because really, like, was it a good idea long term to own ESPN for a much more nominal price than the super high value that it's worth today? Was yes in both cases.
The ABC acquisition of ESPN, that's just like no doubt A plus.
Right.
Like,
right.
Whatever enterprise value of 200 and some odd million that they paid for it.
Yeah, and then the only people that I suppose it may not be an A plus for or an A4 or whatever is Getty, when they sort of acquired it from the Rasmussens.
Hey, 10x.
It was a 10x. They did have to pour a lot of money into it over time
they did.
to float. So
Getty, I think it's almost like you can bucket out the winners and losers here, or like the winners, the big winners and the not so big winners. Getty in the not so big winner, Texaco for sure. They were like barely even played at the table.
Yep.
Nabisco, loser. Hearst might be the biggest winner of all. They didn't have to do anything. Paid $175 million for 20% of the company.
I wonder if Hearst's market cap, are they publicly
They're
traded?
not a public company.
If they were a public company, I wonder if their market cap would be lower than their share of ESPN.
Yeah, you have like a Naspers situation with Tencent.
It's like discounted because you can't get it liquid.
Yeah. I'm sure it would be. But yeah, Hearst is still a private family-owned company.
Is ESPN too expensive now with not enough perceived headroom for where it could grow for anyone to want to buy it from Hearst?
Could be. Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't Disney want to buy it?
It doesn't matter, right? Like they've been getting cash flow distributions for decades. You know? Yeah, but that is a good question. Like, would anybody want to buy that from Hearst right now? I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Where are you on Disney acquiring ABC / Capital Cities containing ESPN?
Well, I mean, no doubt it's an A, right? Like, even without the exact numbers at my fingertips, if half of your operating income as an entire company is coming from ESPN, within a decade of the acquisition, no matter what you paid for it, and the $19 billion, I forget what Disney's market cap was at the time, whatever it was. Anyway, I would say with plenty of fudge factor based on what these numbers were that we don't have at our fingertips, I'm fairly confident it was an A.
Yeah. It is worth noting the contrast to like our sort of two biggest A pluses of all time, or maybe three, are Next reverse acquiring Apple.
Yep. Facebook acquiring
Facebook
Instagram.
acquiring Instagram, and Booking, Priceline acquiring Booking.
Priceline acquiring Booking. Yep.
And this is different than Next in that it was not company saving. Like Disney
would have been fine, right? But nowhere near what they are.
Right. So, if we're like reserving the pluses for company saving or something, it wasn't that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not a plus. I'm an A.
It's an A.
Because they still paid $19 billion for it. Like, it's not like...
Right. I mean, yeah.
It's not like they, invested when... this isn't like Tencent here.
Right. And let's even say half. So in 95, they paid, call it $10 billion-ish for ESPN, just kind of as a conservative thing. And today, or I won't say peak. In the late 2000s, it was $50 billion. Like, it's a 5x over a decade. It's great, and it's...
But that's value. They also have been getting tons of cash flow from it over those years. Yeah. So, I think it's definitely an A.
Owning ESPN's an A.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when we talk about Starwave and ESPN going forward,
it's a different
next
story.
time, we can't promise it will be actually next time, but at some point in the future, unacquired.
Yeah, we should do it.
All right.
Carve Outs?
Carve Outs.
I have an incredibly appropriate one. So there is a very cool podcast that has been started by the folks at GeekWire, in addition to their regular podcast called Numbers Geek. And Todd Bishop, the co-founder of GeekWire,
friend of the show, Todd Bishop,
indeed, and a special guest on the Push Pop Press episode. Boy, that was early on. His co-host, or maybe his featured guest every time, is Steve Ballmer. And Steve Ballmer, of course, the former CEO of Microsoft, owner of the LA Clippers, now he's used sort of his private family wealth to release USA facts. So really diving into making it easy to understand sort of the important numbers about the US, both in government spending, but across a lot of important issues. So they do this great podcast called Numbers Geek. The most recent episode was fascinating. It was called The Basketball Box Score Mystery. Todd presented Steve with a stat sheet, very, very detailed stat sheet from a basketball game, a famous basketball game, and obfuscated the names of all the players and the names of the teams. And he said, Steve, analyze this and give me your best guess at what two teams were playing, what this game was, and who each of these players were on the stat lines. And it's really fun because, Ballmer's such a basketball geek and has been for a long time, long before buying the Clippers, to sort of have him sort of try and analyze and understand everything from, I bet this player was injured and this other player was taking some of his minutes because he was injured. I think this might have been a playoff game. So it's a really cool. And as I was thinking through this episode, just a great tie-in with ESPN.
My Carve Out, I'm going to have to listen to that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
My Carve Out is also near and dear to the show and our community's heart, is a great long piece that Fast Company just released on SoftBank and Masa and his ambitions and where the Vision Fund and SoftBank and WeWork and everything goes from here, by Katrina Brooker and championed by editor and huge supporter of Acquired, David Lidsky. So thank you so much for all your support.
David is, I mentioned the Slack earlier. David is like an awesome member in the Slack.
So great. And this piece is really, really good. I wish it had been out when we did our episode on the Vision Fund. But my favorite moment is this image of when SoftBank corporate acquired Arm, which we'll have to do an episode on someday.
Oh, yeah.
And the deal getting done in the Turkish Mediterranean in an empty restaurant that Masa had bought out and then helicoptered in all the principals from Arm. Amazing.
Why not?
Amazing. So
it's awesome.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, Statsig.
Yes, long-time Acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on Statsig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where Statsig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
Well, folks, thanks as always for going on this journey with us. If you aren't subscribed and you want to hear more, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast client. If you like the show and want to dive deeper with us as a limited partner, you should join the club. You can click the link in the show notes and get access to a special, deeper episode in between every episode that we release on the main show. Or you can go to kimberlite.fm/acquired.
We'll see you next time.
We will.